Hi, my name is Dan, and this is SLAYsmr, an ASMR channel where every week I whisper about a different horror movie that I love. This week's film, in case you couldn't tell from the YouTube description, or this little guy behind me, let me grab him. This week's film is 1988's Pumpkinhead. 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 I usually don't say the names of the movie that repetitively, but Pumpkinhead is a very ASMR friendly, tingly kind of word, so I figured why not. Really quick before we go into the movie, this figurine is part of the Movie Maniacs line from the late 90s, early 2000s, produced by Todd McFarlane. I feel like nowadays you can get all sorts of different versions of movie action figures. When the new Halloween movie came out a couple years ago, suddenly there were 4 or 5 different types of Michael Myers action figures that you could buy. But back in the 90s, that wasn't the case. There weren't any Michael Myers action figures you could get until Todd McFarlane came along and made his Movie Maniacs line. They did have a couple funny choices in there, though. In the Movie Maniacs series, they had Pumpkinhead and Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, all those guys. But they also had Snake Plissken from Escape from New York and LA, which are directed by John Carpenter, who's definitely a horror director, but I wouldn't call either of those movies horror movies. And I don't know if I would call Snake Plissken a movie maniac. He's definitely an anti-hero, but he's not a serial killer. And then he also had the Crow. He had a Crow action figure, and then he also had Shaft, like the Samuel Jackson Shaft, which is really funny to me. The Crow I can kind of see, but Shaft is not a horror movie, and Shaft is the hero. He's not even an anti-hero. He's not a maniac. He's trying to fight the bad guys. So I always thought that was funny, but I guess a lot of it probably came down to what they could get the rights to. But they got the rights to Pumpkinhead, and I got this guy specifically at the Virgin Megastore in downtown Disney, which I don't think is around anymore, but they were one of the only places that really carried all the Movie Maniacs when they first came out. And I feel like not a lot of people looked for them there. If you're shopping around Disney, maybe you don't think to look in the Virgin Megastore for a Pumpkinhead action figure. So yeah, whenever we went there, I grew up in Tampa, but we were about 2 hours away from Orlando. Whenever we went there for Halloween Horror Nights or Disney or whatever else, we would always take a trip to the Virgin Megastore. So thank you, Virgin Megastore, and thank you, Todd McFarlane. Let me put this guy back now. He doesn't stand up super well, so hopefully I don't disrupt anyone's relaxation by making him fall off the shelf, but let's see. Sorry, that was so precarious and clumsy. I hope I didn't disrupt anyone's tingles, but here we are. So, Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead, on its surface, is actually a very, very simple story. It's essentially about this man named Ed Harley, who lives somewhere in the country. He runs a fruit stand, and his son gets run over by a couple of city folk, some teenagers who are riding their dirt bikes around. They accidentally kill him, and Ed is so overcome by grief that he takes his boy to a witch that lives nearby, and she says, "I can't bring your boy back, but I can help you get revenge, but it will come at a price." And revenge in this film comes in the form of a demon named Pumpkinhead. And we'll get into how things get complicated a little bit later on. I remember when I saw the poster for the first poster I saw actually came with this Movie Maniacs action figure. It said A Grim Fairy Tale on it. And I think I've always viewed the movie through that lens. Because as a witch, for one, very fairy tale-esque element. But it also has a very strong sense of morality. And I want that to be the main focus of what we talk about today. But first, we gotta talk about the monster, right? You know me. That's my bag. That's my main thing for all these movies. So Pumpkinhead was directed by Stan Winston, who is super well known for all of his groundbreaking visual effects he's done in Hollywood. He's since passed away, unfortunately, but you know, he's the guy who brought us the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. He brought us the xenomorphs and aliens. He brought us a movie that I love called Gargoyles back in the 70s. It was a made-for-TV movie, but he designed the suits for that. He's done all sorts of stuff. And this was his directorial debut. Now, he actually wasn't approached to direct it originally. He was originally approached by the studio to design the effects for it. And he liked the script so much that he thought it might be a suitable directorial debut for him. And it's funny because I always assumed that he just directed the movie and did the effects for it, but apparently that's not the case. He had his team of people do the effects, and I don't even think he designed the creature or anything. I was watching this Shudder documentary the other night. It's like a 4-hour horror documentary called In Search of Darkness that's about the 1980s being kind of the heyday of horror, and it's just a bunch of talking heads going through all these different movies and Pumpkinhead's in there. And they interviewed Tom Woodruff Jr., who was one of the effects people on it and actually plays Pumpkinhead. He wears the suit, and he was saying how Stan Winston was actually really gracious and generous about letting them do their thing and not trying to make it his creature. Which is funny because it still ends up feeling like a Stan Winston creature, right? But then again, that's how really smart creators know how to put their stamp on something. They give people freedom, right? I think you're much more likely to get results from an approach like that than being a dictator about all that. So Stan Winston directed it, and I think he did some finessing on the screenplay too, because he has a writing credit. And what I love about this monster, first off, it's tall, and that maybe that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but I think the villains in so many of these movies, they may be a little big. Like Michael Myers is a tall dude, Jason Voorhees is a tall dude, etc. But this thing is like 10 feet tall, and so automatically that's scary. It's this spindly, tall thing that's always walking around, and you see a lot of it. It's not the Jaws situation where, oh, well, we couldn't get this to look like we want it to look or move like we want it to move, so we're going to conceal it as much as possible. You see a lot of Pumpkinhead. I mean, Stan Winston's very strategic with the reveal. When Ed Harley, played by Lance Henriksen, when he's a little kid, the first scene of the movie, he sees someone else get attacked by it, and we see Pumpkinhead in silhouette then. And then when the way Pumpkinhead gets brought to life is that Ed has to dig up this corpse from a pumpkin patch inside a cemetery, which I've never seen in my life before, but that's the reality this movie lives in, and I respect it. Once again, it's that kind of fairy tale logic. There's a witch that lives nearby, and there's a cemetery that also has a pumpkin patch in it. Anyway, he has to dig up this kind of shriveled, weird-looking corpse and bring it to the witch, and then she takes some of Ed's blood and some of his dead son's blood and mixes it and says some chants, some incantations, and then Pumpkinhead grows, and so we see it growing in shadow. And then I think the next thing we see of it is, I think it's a long talon, and then we see a tail, and then eventually we start to see glimpses of its face, and then we see, full body shots. My favorite shot of the movie is the teens who accidentally killed Ed's son. They're in their cabin. They're wondering what's going on, and you see Pumpkinhead just full, like 10 feet tall, crazy height Pumpkinhead just lurk by the window, just stroll by it. It's so cool. And I think sometimes when we see films that use puppetry or animatronics, we don't see the creature moving in full. for instance, in An American Werewolf in London, which is a movie I love, the wolf puppet for that was essentially like a wheelbarrow. It had someone pushing it, and then it was just its front half moving legs like that. And it's a cool effect. I really love that movie and the visuals. And they obviously had to do it that way because they couldn't get an animatronic werewolf that would walk around on all fours, right? But in Pumpkinhead, because it's essentially just Tom Woodruff Jr. inside this suit, I mean, you see the thing walking around. There's no sense of trying to conceal anything. You see a lot of it once the reveal happens. So that's also what I love about the monster. And they do, to kind of play around with the height, they do a lot of suspension. And by that I mean someone will get attacked and you don't see Pumpkinhead's claws or anything around the person's leg. You just see the person kind of get lifted up and flailing around. Like if this is the screen, you're just seeing their body flailing around like that, and you just know this giant thing is wagging them around. So I think that's just different. You know, I don't think we see horror movie antagonists that are that tall. So yeah, Pumpkinhead is really freaky. One thing I noticed this time around on the rewatch is that when Ed brings this little shriveled corpse to the witch to get reanimated, no joke, it looks almost exactly like Voldemort in the Harry Potter movies when he's in the small, weakened state. And now that I think about it, hold up for a second, now that I think about it, the way Voldemort comes back to life and grows into full is almost the same as in Pumpkinhead. He needs blood, right? He needs like a sacrifice. He needs these certain things to make him come to life. And like Pumpkinhead, he grows. Once Voldemort is at full height, he doesn't look like Pumpkinhead, but when he's in that little weird baby form, and Pumpkinhead is in that little weird baby form, they look almost exactly alike. I'm wondering if those Harry Potter films maybe ripped off Pumpkinhead a little bit. I actually did a Google search of, I think I just typed in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Pumpkinhead. Nothing came up. So I think David Yates directed that movie. I could be wrong. I think he needs to give Pumpkinhead some credit. I mean, they look exactly the same. Maybe I'll do a little Twitter comparison or something. See if there's any substantiality to any of that. But yeah, that's what I thought this time. Like, oh, it looks like baby Voldemort. So that's the monster. And even if the monster was the only thing good about this movie, I think it would still be a really good movie. So say we had the same plot, same monster, but the characters were a lot more shallow, I think the movie would still be good because the monster is that cool looking. Even the way it moves around and its knobbiness and its exoskeleton reminds me a lot of Aliens, which once again is, Stan Winston's stamp on it. So the movie would be good just on its monster merits, let's call it. But I think this movie transcends to another level because of its sense of morality. And I think that ties back to the fairy tale thing, because most fairy tales have some kind of moral. Maybe not the original fairy tales, because we all know those are really messed up and tragic and sometimes don't make any sense. I'm talking, I guess, westernized, sanitized versions of fairy tales that we all grew up reading, right? They all have a moral, like there's a lesson at the end of it. And Pumpkinhead is a movie that is steeped in morality, and not the black and white sort either. It actually has lots of shades of gray. Every character in this movie is going through some kind of moral crisis. We'll start with Ed Harley, played by Lance Henriksen, who is so excellent and grizzled in this movie, but also has some real pain going on beneath the surface once his son dies. So we get to see, oh gosh, it's so sad. I really hope this isn't triggering for anyone, because this is such a sad scene. I mean, it gets me every time. When the teenage dirt bikers run over his son, Billy. Ed's not around, and they're in the backwoods, so there's no phone or anything, and the one guy who actually kills the son, he's already got a drunk driving charge, so he freaks out and he goes away, and he leaves his brother there to take care of Billy. So Ed comes back to his store, and he sees this random stranger holding Billy. And at first we see he's seeing his son hurt, right? It's really sad. And then when the teenager tries to help him, Ed Harley just glares at him like he wants to kill him. So we see his emotional state fluctuate really quick, which is excellent. And then this is the scene that breaks my heart. There's no hospital around or anything because it's the backwoods. So Ed brings him home, I think, to try and heal him. But it doesn't work. The son succumbs to his injuries pretty quickly. And this kid's little. He's like 8 or 9 probably. And also played by a guy named Matthew Hurley, who I don't think he's done a lot that I've seen since this, but as a kid, oh gosh, he is just heartbreaking. He's such a sincere performance and so emotionally hard-hitting. He almost looks a little like the kid from Jerry Maguire, but not as cutesy. He plays it a little bit more low-key, which I think makes him a more realistic and tragic character. Anyway, Ed brings home his son, and he's putting water on his son's head and just kind of cradling him. And he starts telling him this story that he used to tell him earlier in the movie. And the son wakes up for a split second and says, "Daddy," and then passes away. And there's such a connection there. And you feel so much for both of them. And even before that, we've got to see them be happy a lot. We get to see their daily routine and how they run around with the dog. And we just get to see it. The movie's only like 84 minutes. And we probably only see 3 or 4 minutes of their father-son dynamic and relationship. But that's all you need because the performances are so strong. And it's funny because, I come from a theater background, a playwriting background. And although a lot of playwrights do write for film and TV, I think the rules are a little bit different. For whatever reason, I think in theater we're permitted to take our time a little bit more with building relationships and showing things that maybe don't seem directly related to the story at first, but then we find out they are. Movies, from what I know of them, it's a little bit different, right? It's 1 page per 1 minute, so you have to move things along a lot faster, especially in a horror movie. You don't have much time to make people care about these characters. You have to do it in just a few minutes, especially if they're gonna die, right? I mean, the deaths are only affecting if you actually care about these people. And Pumpkinhead, through a mixture of the direction, the script, and these wonderful performances by Lance Henriksen and Matthew Hurley, they make you care so much about this father and son in just a few minutes. And I'm kind of amazed by that every single time I watch this movie. Even if I think about my favorite horror movie, Halloween, we get a lot more time with the 3 central babysitters for us to care about them, and we care about them too. But even though Pumpkinhead's not my number 1 favorite horror movie, the relationship between Ed and his son Billy might be one of my favorite, if not my favorite, horror relationships, and it's so heartbreaking when it gets shattered. So we see that. We get to see Ed go from being very pained that his son, or very concerned that something happened to his son, to very angry at these teens, to absolutely heartbroken, to stone-eyed vengeance after that. So we're getting to see a character that goes through a very dynamic and intense emotional journey, which is interesting in itself. But I'm talking about his moral crisis, right? That's why I started rambling about Ed Harley. After he summons Pumpkinhead, he realizes he's connected to Pumpkinhead, and that's part of the lore that the witch didn't tell him, that the person who wants revenge, the price they pay is that they get connected to this demon, this creature, and the only way to actually stop the creature is to hurt themselves, right? Like if Ed kills himself, then the creature dies. So once the revenge starts, Ed is actually seeing these teenagers get killed through the eyes of this monster, and that's where his moral crisis begins. He realizes that even though they're responsible for his son's death, he does not want this to happen to them. And he tries to backtrack, and he catches up to them once most of them have been killed. There's, I think, 3 left. And he tries to correct his mistake. And so he's in this moral crisis, and I can't think of a ton of horror movies where that's the case. Usually it's, killer comes after you, you try and run away from them. And this is a lot different because Ed is the one who summoned the killer. He's the hero, but he summoned the killer and is connected to the killer. And tries to switch course. He wanted these kids to be killed, and now he doesn't. And so, moral crisis right there. Then you have the teenagers themselves, who have different degrees of moral complications regarding the death of Billy. You have Maggie, who is very Christian and feels horrible when she sees Billy get killed and kind of goes into a state of shock. And Pumpkinhead mocks her later on when he gets her. He carves this cross into her head with the nail, so it's kind of mocking religion in this way. Then you have Joel, who is the reckless teenager who actually runs over Billy. Who, it's funny because when the movie starts, he's almost amoral. We hear that he's done something similar in the past. He got into a drunk driving accident where he hurt someone. So that's pretty bad, right? And then he tries to run away from what he did, and when some of the other teens want to tell the authorities, he like physically assaults them. So he's kind of a bad dude for a while. And then eventually, after he sees his girlfriend Kim get killed, or actually a little bit before that, I think, he actually has a change of heart because all of his friends are dying. He actually decides he's going to turn himself in. So even the worst character in the movie, and he's bad, he's not a good guy, he has a moral crisis at a certain point. He sees what is happening to his friends because of his actions, and he has a moral decision he has to make. He's at a moral crossroads. His brother Steve is also riding dirt bikes with him, but Steve isn't the one who hits Billy. But once again, Steve is Joel's brother, so he's caught between, do I send my brother to jail or do I help him and do the wrong thing? Steve is kind of caught in the middle. He's also the one that stays with Billy and Ed sees, so Steve has a lot of moral complications too. And then you have Chris and Tracy, who are the only two that end up surviving, who from the beginning want to call the cops, and they also don't know that, none of them know that Billy actually died, right? So anyway, I just went down a huge laundry list of everyone in the movie, but everyone is at some kind of moral crossroads in the movie. What should we do? What are the consequences of doing this versus the consequences of doing this? What's the right thing to do? And the only one who's not like that is the witch, which very much in the fairy tale tradition, she accepts what Pumpkinhead does, and she warns Ed. She's like, it's like any witch in a fairy tale, if you do this thing, you're gonna pay. But he does it anyway. So with the exception of the witch and then the son, because he goes away so quickly, every character in this film is experiencing some kind of moral crisis, all while being chased by a giant monster, which is pretty cool and pretty different compared to most creature features. So that's, for me, that is why the movie is not just a cool looking film with fancy effects. It is those things, but it is a tale of morality. And I think the big moral, if we're working in fairy tale land, if we're operating by fairy tale logic, I think the big moral of this is revenge comes at a cost, right? And not to get overly simple with it, but revenge is usually probably not good. Revenge is bad. That's the moral. It's the anti-Kill Bill. Revenge is a bad thing. But in all seriousness, Lance Henriksen's character, the protagonist, Ed Harley, he goes from wishing revenge on these teenagers, wishing death on these teenagers, to, vengeance comes at a price, and it's not going to bring his son back. It's not going to make him feel satisfied in any kind of way. It's actually going to make him feel worse. And he does pay the ultimate price at the end because Pumpkinhead, once he realizes Pumpkinhead is connected to him, Pumpkinhead is about to kill Tracy, one of the final teens. And to save her, Lance Henriksen shoots himself. He redeems himself in his own way. He pays for what he did, and he does the right thing. And it's funny, full disclosure, I think I'm an agnostic, not that we have to get too much into religion, but I think it's important because it informs this next thing I'm about to say. believe in any kind of traditional afterlife, but I hope that him and his son get to be reunited at the end of this. Although, what you find out at the end is technically he is still merged with Pumpkinhead, and when we see the witch throwing the Pumpkinhead corpse back into the grave, we see a necklace that Ed's son made him that he wore on Pumpkinhead's neck. So it's funny because I would like to think that because Ed does the right thing at the end, he gets reunited with his son in the afterlife in some way. I think he's kind of doomed to be to be the next Pumpkinhead. And there are several sequels. I know the next one's called Blood Wings. I think Pumpkinhead can fly in it or something, I don't know. I've never sought out any of the sequels. You would think that they directly continue this story because this has a little bit of a cliffhanger. It's like, oh, is Ed Pumpkinhead now? But from what I know, I don't think any of the sequels follow up on Ed's actions or what he did. If you've seen any of the sequels, let me know. Let me know if they're any kind of direct continuation of the narrative, and more importantly, let me know if they're worth seeing and seeking out. Maybe I'll get around to them one day. Anyway, that is 1988's Pumpkinhead, one of my favorite horror movies, and one that I think is actually a lot more morally complex and just deeper than it gets credit for. I think it kind of gets written off as being a second-rate monster movie, and it is anything but, in my opinion. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but part of why I chose this particular movie was because, although I know technically we're not in October yet, any horror fan worth their salt knows that the spooky season starts in September. Am I right? Which means I'm trying to watch nothing but horror movies between now, early September and the beginning of November. I watched Badlands by Terrence Malick and that Class Action Park documentary, but after that I'm like, that's it. Only horror movies from here on out. I rewatched Pumpkinhead, and I chose that as the kind of kickoff to the spooky season because even though it's not a Halloween movie, it's got a witch in it. It's got great autumnal atmosphere, even though it's obviously filmed in California, someplace that really feels like backwoods fall. There's just fake leaves everywhere. Like every shot in this movie has leaves swirling around, and there's these old Gothic churches. Stan Winston just does such a good job with the atmosphere. But so even though it's not an official Halloween movie, it feels like one to me. It's called Pumpkinhead. It's got a pumpkin patch in a cemetery. How Halloween is that? Am I right? So that's why I decided to kick off the spooky season, which begins in early September, with this particular film. And I've got the schedule planned out for a while, so and each choice has a meaning to it, which I'll probably explain in each episode. Thank you so much again for watching. I know I keep saying this, but as I try and spread the word and build my audience, if you want to recommend this podcast to anyone, please tell them to like and subscribe yourself, or just tune in and watch. That's really cool too. It's been so great interacting with some of you on social media and just getting to know you a little bit. I hope the show continues to be informative and relaxing, or maybe, hopefully both. Feel free to let me know if there's any particular movie you would like to see covered in the comments or by reaching out to me, and I will get around to doing that. So, until next week, next Monday, take care. I hope you're all staying safe, happy, healthy, and engaged. And if you're not able to be all of those things, that's okay too, because it is a strange time right now. And I'm going to keep saying that until we don't have to say that anymore, which will hopefully be soon. But we shall see. Until then, stay safe, stay sleepy, keep the monsters at bay.